As you'll recall, the stories of Abraham touch on four main issues: divine grace, Abraham's loyalty, God's blessings to Abraham, and God's blessings through Abraham. In the lessons that follow, we'll point out again and again how these themes speak to our lives as Abraham's seed. At this point, we'll briefly offer some general directions we should follow. Consider first the theme of divine grace. God showed much mercy to Abraham, not only at the beginning of his life, but every day of his existence on earth. And as the Scriptures clearly teach, just as God showed mercy to Abraham, God also shows grace to Christians today that initiates and sustains us in Christ. As Paul put it in Ephesians chapter 2, verses 8 and 9, "For it is by grace you have been saved, through faith, and this not from yourselves. It is the gift of God, not by works, so that no one can boast." Salvation in Christ is God's gracious gift. Even the faith we have comes from Him. We depend so much on God's mercy that every day of our Christian lives we are to continue to live in that mercy. Without God's sustaining grace, all of our efforts to remain faithful are futile. For this reason, just as the Israelites following Moses should have learned the wonder of God's grace in their lives as they heard the stories of Abraham's life, every time we read of God showing mercy to Abraham, as followers of Christ, both together and as individuals, we have opportunities to learn how to be grateful for what God has done for us. God has shown much mercy to us, and we must learn how to seek and depend on His mercy. In much the same way, the theme of Abraham's loyalty also applies to followers of Christ on many levels. As we read the life of Abraham, we see many situations in which Abraham was commanded to serve God in obedience. Of course, he did not reach perfection in this life, but he did show the fruit of true faith. Now, it's important to remember that even in the Old Testament, faithful obedience was always based on the mercy and grace of God. So we must not mistake this emphasis as some form of legalism. Nevertheless, just as in the Old Testament, true believers today are expected to respond to God's grace with faithful service to God. This is why the New Testament frequently emphasizes the responsibility of loyalty for followers of Christ. Listen to the way Paul connected grace and loyalty in Ephesians chapter 2, verses 8 through 10. "For it is by grace you have been saved through faith, and this not from yourselves, it is the gift of God, not by works, so that no one can boast. For we are His workmanship, created in Christ Jesus to do good works, which God prepared in advance for us to do." As verse 10 makes clear, Christians today have the responsibility to perform good works. God grants us saving faith so that we will be faithful to Him. So every time we see how Abraham's life raises issues related to human loyalty, we are in a position to apply those moral responsibilities to our lives. In the third place, we should also be cognizant of the ways in which the blessings given to Abraham apply to the Christian life. You'll recall that God promised great blessings to Abraham and his seed. Ultimately, they would become a great, prosperous nation of grand renown. And throughout the stories of Abraham, we find times when God blessed the patriarch with foretastes of these ultimate blessings. Just as the original audience of Israel could see the promises to Abraham being fulfilled in their lives as they waited for their ultimate blessings, as Christians today, we experience many foretastes of these same blessings here and now as we wait in hope for the day when they will come to us in all of their fullness. The blessings we see in this life can give us much encouragement as we live our daily lives in hope of the ultimate blessings that will be ours when Christ returns. Finally, as Abraham's stories focus on the blessings God would give to the world through Abraham, Christians also have opportunity to reflect on the blessings that come through us to the world. You'll recall that Abraham was promised protection from enemies and blessings for his friends so that one day he would share God's blessings with all the nations of the earth. And more than this, throughout Abraham's stories, we see that God used Abraham now and then as the instrument of his blessing to all kinds of people. When the original audience of Genesis learned of these events, they had many opportunities to reflect on events in their day. They found guidance for the ways they were to serve as God's instruments of blessing to the world as they encountered different groups of people. They could be sure of God's protection against enemies, and they could move forward with efforts to spread the blessings of God's kingdom to their neighbors. In much the same way, we Christians today should apply this motif to our lives. We too can have assurance of God's protection, and we can find encouragement to be a blessing to all nations of the earth by extending God's kingdom to the ends of the earth.